The morning sun was just beginning to paint the Arizona hills in shades of burnished copper when the first true signs of trouble rode into my life, shattering the illusion of peace I had carefully cultivated. My name is Caleb McKinnon, though most folks around these parts just call me Cal. And at 42 years of age, I have learned the hard way that the most tranquil sunrises often precede the deadliest storms, transforming a quiet day into a fight for survival without a moment's notice. I was serving as the foreman of the Black Rock Ranch, charged with the heavy responsibility of managing 2,000 head of Colonel William Morrison's prime cattle while he attended to his various business interests up in Denver, leaving me as the sole authority on this sprawling expanse of high desert. My crew was a mixed bag of humanity, consisting of 8 men who I generally considered reliable, though their experiences varied wildly. There were Miguel Santos and Jose Martinez, 2 veteran Mexican vaqueros whose understanding of livestock was so profound they seemed to communicate with the herd telepathically, and Tom Bradley, a stoic buffalo soldier bearing the jagged scars of wounded knee who possessed the uncanny ability to shoot the eye out of a rattlesnake at 100 yards. Rounding out the veterans was Pat Kelly, a fiery Irish immigrant who had cut his teeth fighting ruthless cattle thieves in Kansas, while the rest of the outfit was comprised of 4 younger hands, Danny Webb, Frank Torres, Billy McKee, and Sam Johnson, good boys with honest hearts, but green as spring grass and utterly untested by the horrors of true violence. For 3 weeks, a systematic plague of cattle rustling had been gnawing at my peace of mind like a gangrenous infection, but this wasn't the sloppy, random theft of desperate men looking for a quick meal. Someone was culling specific animals with a military precision that chilled me to the bone, leaving behind trails so faint they were barely whispered in the dust. I had been tracking their sign deeper into the treacherous Red Rock country near Devil's Canyon, following a ghost of a trail that led uncomfortably close to Apache territory where even the bravest men feared to tread, and it was there, amidst the towering sandstone and brooding shadows, that destiny finally decided to look me in the eye. The woman was an Apache, perhaps 26 years of age, with hair as black as a raven's wing braided with eagle feathers and dark, observant eyes that seemed to catalogue every nuance of her surroundings with terrifying clarity. She had been cornered against the sheer sandstone wall of the canyon by 3 white men, dirty ex-cavalry types by the cut of their jib, wearing the haggard look of soldiers who had lost their moral compass in the aftermath of the war and never bothered to find it again. Their leader was a hulking brute of a man with a steely, merciless gaze and faded captain's bars pinned to his dust-covered jacket, carrying himself with the arrogance of Confederate cavalry, the specific breed of officer who had never truly accepted the surrender at Appomattox. "Last chance, Indian princess," he snarled, his voice dripping with malice as he closed the distance between them. "Tell us where your daddy hides his tribal gold, or we'll have ourselves some entertainment before sending you to meet your ancestors." At that moment, I knew I should have turned my horse around and ridden back to the safe, predictable rhythm of ranch work, minding my own affairs as a prudent man would. But there are times when a man's conscience carries significantly more weight than his survival instincts. I guided my mount into full view, my Winchester lever-action rifle already shouldered and ready for business, and called out, "That's far enough, gentlemen." The captain rotated slowly, evaluating me with the cold calculation of a wolf sizing up potential prey, and dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Ride on, cowboy," he said, his hand hovering near his pistol. "This matter doesn't involve you." When I refused to leave, declaring it my business, the situation exploded. The Apache woman erupted into fluid motion like a striking diamondback, producing a war club from nowhere to crush one attacker's knee while simultaneously blinding another with a handful of sand. The captain clawed for his holstered Colt, but my Winchester spoke first, the 44-40 slug catching him high in the shoulder and spinning him around, ruining his draw and sending his remaining men scrambling to drag their wounded leader away like frightened quail. As he staggered away, clutching his bloody shoulder, the captain locked his harsh, pain-filled stare on me with a look of undiluted hatred that promised retribution. "You just painted a target on every soul at Black Rock Ranch, McKinnon," he spat, his voice tight with agony. "Remember that when the killing starts." The fact that he knew my name sent a stream of ice water through my veins, a chilling realization that this was no chance encounter, but something far more sinister. The Apache woman studied me with the focused intensity of a hunting hawk, introducing herself in cultured English as Ayana Redcrow, daughter of Chief Black Crow and a medicine woman of the peaceful bands. When I introduced myself, she tilted her head thoughtfully, reading my features as if they were tracking signs in the dirt. "You are not what you appear to be, Cal McKinnon," she observed, noting something in my demeanor that hinted at a past I kept buried. "That man you wounded, Captain McGrath, Mad Dog McGrath they call him throughout the territory, he is orchestrating something far more sinister than simple cattle theft." The story she unfolded turned my blood to winter slush. The ride back to Black Rock Ranch provided dangerous time for contemplation, and thinking can be a liability for a man facing seemingly impossible odds. Ayana rode beside me in contemplative silence, but I sensed her continuous evaluation, measuring whether I truly deserved the trust she was placing in my hands, and occasionally I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something deeper than mere tactical assessment. As the evening shadows lengthened across the desert floor, turning the scrub brush into grasping fingers of darkness, she finally broke the silence. "You carry the bearing of a man who has seen much war, Cal McKinnon," she said softly, "but your eyes hold no cruelty. That is unusual." I replied that war changes men in different ways. Some it hardens into killers, while others it teaches the infinite value of peace. When she asked which I was, I considered her question carefully before answering that I was a man who would fight when he must, but never because he wanted to. Something in her expression softened at that admission, and for a brief moment, the dangerous woman warrior disappeared, replaced by someone vulnerable and surprisingly young. Upon reaching the ranch, I summoned my entire crew to the main bunkhouse, where 8 weathered faces regarded me expectantly, waiting for explanations that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. When I described the approaching storm, Apache war parties armed with stolen military rifles, a territorial government conspiracy, and calculated genocide, the reaction was immediate. The 4 younger men exchanged worried glances, and after a hurried conference, Danny Webb spoke for the group, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. McKinnon, we signed on for cattle work, not fighting wars. This is beyond what we bargained for." I couldn't blame them. By sunset, Danny Webb, Frank Torres, Billy McKee, and Sam Johnson had collected their wages and departed without looking back, because fighting Apache warbands is not employment for boys who still dream of peaceful deaths in their beds. This exodus reduced my force to my 4 veterans, Miguel, Jose, Tom, and Pat. 4 experienced gunmen to defend an entire ranch against trained killers and an army of hostiles. I had faced worse odds during my service at Little Bighorn, but not significantly worse, and the reality of our situation began to sink in as the sun dipped below the horizon. However, Ayana contributed more than mere warning. She brought authentic Apache knowledge, warfare tactics, survival techniques, and a territorial understanding that no cavalry manual could ever provide. "Your enemies anticipate conventional white soldier tactics," she observed, while surveying our ranch buildings with a critical eye. "Predictable formations, direct assaults, linear thinking. Fight like Apache instead. Utilize terrain advantages, force them to approach on your terms." We labored throughout the night by flickering lantern light, transforming the ranch into a fortress. As we worked, I noticed how naturally Ayana fitted into our preparations, moving with quiet efficiency, her hands as skilled at constructing defensive positions as they were at healing the sick. When she caught me watching her work, she offered a small, tired smile that made something stir in my chest, a feeling I hadn't entertained in years. During a brief break, as we shared water and hardtack, she sat close beside me on the porch steps and asked about my family. "None left," I admitted. "Parents died 3 years ago. Never married. Always figured ranch life was too hard for bringing a woman into." She looked directly into my eyes, her gaze piercing through my defenses. "Perhaps you simply hadn't met the right woman." The way she said it made my heart hammer against my ribs, a physical reaction to the sudden intimacy in the midst of impending doom. We established sandbag defensive positions surrounding the main house, creating overlapping fields of fire and unobstructed shooting lanes from every window and doorway. Miguel and Jose excavated camouflaged rifle pits on the surrounding hillsides, positioned to catch attackers in devastating crossfire patterns, while Ayana instructed us in survival sign reading, interpreting bird flight patterns that revealed approaching riders, and distinguishing between dust clouds raised by peaceful cattle versus war parties moving at combat speed. As we worked, a bond began to form, forged in the fires of necessity, but rooted in something deeper, a shared recognition of the lonely paths we had both walked to reach this moment. Dawn brought with it not the screaming war cries of Apache raiders we had steeled ourselves against, but the solitary rhythmic thud of hoofbeats approaching at a dangerous speed through territory that was now effectively a kill zone. I positioned myself behind the newly constructed wall of sandbags, the cold steel of my Winchester pressing reassuringly against my cheek, but the tension in my shoulders eased slightly when I recognized the distinctive gait of a bay gelding I had seen many times before. The rider was Tommy Webb, a 19-year-old boy I knew from the polite social circles of Denver, the son of Senator Webb, and a young man who seemed utterly out of place in this harsh landscape of rock and thorn. He dismounted his foam-flecked horse with a clumsiness that spoke of exhaustion and panic, his nervous demeanor and darting eyes immediately arousing a suspicion I couldn't quite suppress despite our acquaintance. "Colonel Morrison asked me to check on ranch security," he announced, his voice cracking slightly, the lie hanging in the air like smoke. "My father, Senator Webb, is Morrison's business partner in several territorial ventures. Heard there might be Indian difficulties." The explanation was plausible on the surface. Webb and Morrison were indeed entangled in various land investments, but something about his arrival felt orchestrated, a wrong note in a song I knew too well. Ayana watched him with a predatory focus that was terrifying to behold. Her intuitive senses, honed by a lifetime of survival in a land that offered no second chances, detected the deception instantly, her eyes tracking his every twitch and bead of sweat like a mountain lion watching a wounded deer. We offered him water and shelter, but the air remained thick with unspoken questions, and I noticed Ayana never once turned her back on him, her hand remaining constantly near the knife at her belt. That afternoon, the blistering Arizona sun beat down on the ranch, baking the earth and shimmering in heat waves off the rocks, creating a surreal atmosphere as I went to inspect our horse herd. It was there, amidst the dusty quiet of the corral, that the betrayal revealed itself in a flash of reflected light. I discovered Tommy using a small hand mirror to flash coded signals toward the surrounding hills, a silent language of treachery that cut deeper than any knife. When I confronted him, grabbing him roughly by the collar and slamming him against the rough wood of the fencing, his facade crumbled instantly. "Please forgive me, Mr. McKinnon. I never intended anyone to suffer," he cried, his confession tumbling out between desperate, heaving sobs that shook his slender frame. The truth was a tangled web of political corruption and familial coercion. His father, the esteemed senator, was deeply involved with Captain McGrath's organization, financing their murderous operations through the misappropriation of territorial development funds. McGrath had demanded intelligence about the ranches in this area, specifically targeting Black Rock because of my crew of former soldiers, and when Tommy had discovered the horrific truth and threatened to expose the scheme, they had turned the weapon of fear against him, threatening the lives of his mother and sisters unless he cooperated. He had been providing detailed information about my ranch operations, our crew capabilities, and our defensive possibilities for weeks, effectively handing the keys to our destruction to a madman. McGrath promised nobody would be seriously hurt if I provided accurate information, he pleaded, tears streaming down his dust-streaked face. He claimed they only wanted the cattle and land for legitimate development. I stared at him, appalled by the sheer magnitude of his naivety, realizing that this boy had unwittingly signed our death warrants. "You naive fool," I rasped, restraining the urge to throttle him only by the sheer force of will. "That madman is orchestrating a war that will kill hundreds of innocents." The rage that boiled within me was a toxic brew of anger at the betrayal and frustration at my own blindness, but Ayana's steadying hand on my arm prevented me from committing regrettable violence against the sobbing boy. Her touch was gentle but firm, grounding me in the moment, and I found myself reluctant to break the contact even as my blood ran hot. "The boy is merely a manipulated tool," she said, her voice a calm anchor in the storm of my emotions. "The hand controlling that tool represents our true enemy." As we secured Tommy in the reinforced root cellar, effectively removing him from the equation, Ayana noticed the tremors in my hands, not from fear but from the adrenaline of fury and the sting of having my trust weaponized against me. "You blame yourself for trusting him," she observed, her eyes searching mine with a depth of understanding that was disarming. "I should have seen it coming," I replied bitterly, the weight of leadership pressing down like a physical load. No man can see all deceptions, but a good man chooses to trust despite the risk. That is not weakness, Cal McKinnon. It is strength. She placed both of her hands on mine, steadying them with a warmth that seemed to seep into my very bones. "You will not face this alone. Whatever comes, we face it together." The simple promise, spoken with such quiet conviction in the dim light of the cellar, meant more to me than any words I had ever heard, forging a bond between us that felt stronger than steel. As the evening approached, bringing with it the inevitable violence we had prepared for, Ayana revealed something extraordinary that shifted the ground beneath my feet. "3 nights ago, I experienced a powerful vision," she said quietly, her voice carrying an intimacy that made me lean closer. "The spirits showed me a white man with a warrior's heart but gentle hands, fighting beside me against a great darkness. They told me this man would appear when my people faced their greatest peril. When I saw you defend me in that canyon, I recognized you immediately from my dream. This revelation of a spiritual dimension added a profound weight to our alliance, elevating our connection from a desperate partnership of survival to something ordained by forces beyond our comprehension. According to Apache tradition, such visions carry absolute authority from the spirit world, and knowing she viewed our meeting as destiny rather than chance humbled me. The way she looked at me when she spoke of the vision suggested the spirits had shown her more than just a military alliance, hinting at a future that seemed impossibly bright against the backdrop of the coming night. "What else did the spirits show you?" I asked. My voice hushed. "That is for after we survive what is coming," she replied with a cryptic smile. But the reality of our situation crashed back in on us. Our defensive preparations were severely compromised because McGrath now knew our exact positions, our manpower, and our tactical arrangements through Tommy's intelligence. The element of surprise, which we had counted on to level the playing field, was entirely lost. The assault commenced with the setting sun, a time when deceptive lighting and shifting shadows severely impaired accurate marksmanship, playing to the attacker's advantage. 15 mounted raiders materialized on the ridge above our ranch, deployed in expert military formation that spoke of their professional background. McGrath led them personally, his wounded shoulder heavily bandaged, but his gun hand remaining as steady as granite. They had acquired formidable firepower since our encounter in the canyon, Spencer repeating carbines capable of punching deadly holes through our adobe walls, and Sharp's buffalo rifles with sufficient range to kill at distances where we couldn't effectively return fire. Most ominously, they had somehow obtained a Civil War-era mountain howitzer, likely raided from an abandoned Confederate supply depot near Tucson. The sight of that cannon, a weapon of war designed to shatter fortifications, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the desert night air. The opening volley shattered every window in our main house and reduced the heavy barn door to splinters, the deafening roar of the rifles signaling the beginning of the end. I responded with my Winchester, operating the lever mechanism smoothly and rapidly, placing shots where they would inflict maximum damage to both men and mounts, trying to break their momentum before they could dig in. Miguel and Jose commenced firing from their concealed hillside positions, their sharp rifle cracks echoing across the valley like deadly thunder, catching the raiders in the crossfire we had planned. Tom Bradley achieved first blood with a spectacular long-range shot that I would remember for the rest of my days. The veteran Buffalo soldier drove a heavy .45-70 slug through one of McGrath's raiders at over 200 yards, dropping both horse and rider in a catastrophic tangle of limbs and dust. But McGrath was no amateur tactician. He quickly realized the danger of our rifle pits and withdrew his surviving men beyond effective rifle range, preparing that terrifying howitzer for action. The first explosive shell obliterated half the barn's front wall in a shower of splintered wood and choking dust, the concussion rocking the ground beneath our feet. The second projectile demolished our water trough, sending a geyser of water into the air and scattering our remaining horses in panic. He was systematically destroying our protective cover, methodically preparing for the final, overwhelming assault that would crush our resistance through pure firepower superiority. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of explosions, shouting men, and screaming horses that assaulted the senses. Amidst this chaos, Ayana made a desperate, selfless offer that stopped my heart. "I will surrender myself to him," she declared, checking her rifle's ammunition with a calm that terrified me. "Trade my life for the safety of your men." The thought of losing her, of handing her over to a monster like McGrath, hit me like a physical blow. "Absolutely not," I snapped, gripping her shoulder. "It might be our only remaining option," she argued. "There is always another alternative," I insisted, reaching out to touch her face, wiping away a smudge of gunpowder. "I won't lose you. Not when I'm just beginning to understand what you mean to me." Something flickered in her eyes at my words, a recognition perhaps of feelings that mirrored my own, shining through the grime and fear of battle. "Then tell me," she whispered, the chaos of the fight momentarily fading into the background. "Tell me what I mean to you." I looked at her, this fierce, beautiful woman who had ridden into my life and changed everything, and spoke the absolute truth. "You mean hope," I said. "Hope that a man like me might deserve something better than this lonely life." Her smile was radiant, a beacon of light even amid the smoke and ruin of war. It was then, emboldened by that connection, that I remembered the hard-earned lessons from the Cheyenne and Lakota warriors who had made the 7th Cavalry pay dearly in blood for every mile of contested prairie. Sometimes the most effective defense involves an aggressive offensive action that completely surprises your enemies, a move so audacious they cannot counter it. I looked out at the rolling dust clouds and the shadowy forms of the cattle agitated by the noise. "Miguel!" I roared over the din of battle to my trusted segundo. "How quickly can you mobilize our herd?" The weathered vaquero, seeing exactly what I had in mind, let his scarred face split into a fierce, understanding grin that showed his teeth. 10 minutes, Jefe," he shouted back. "Possibly less." It was a gamble of the highest order, risking our livelihood to save our lives. But we were out of options. Our 2,000 head of prime longhorn cattle, already agitated and frightened by the continuous gunfire and explosions, were about to be transformed from livestock into a living avalanche of horns, hooves, and barely controlled fury. Miguel and Jose abandoned their rifle pits and rode behind the massive herd like avenging spirits, firing pistols into the darkening sky and shouting like Comanche raiders, driving the tremendous stampede directly toward McGrath's carefully prepared defensive positions. The ground began to tremble, a low rumble that grew into a roar, shaking the earth with the power of thousands of pounding hooves. The dust kicked up by the herd was thick enough to choke a grown man, filling the evening air and turning the twilight into a brown fog of war. As the stampede gained momentum, I watched with a grim satisfaction as the tables turned. McGrath's horses, disciplined as they were, went completely insane with terror at the sight and sound of the approaching wall of beef and bone, bucking frantically and scattering his men like autumn leaves caught in a hurricane wind. The carefully laid siege lines disintegrated in seconds as the raiders realized that no rifle, not even a cannon, could stop 2,000 terrified longhorns. As our cattle thundered through their encampment, smashing wagons and trampling equipment, I counted approximately 1,800 head continuing toward the open range, a significant loss of assets, but a manageable one considering the alternative was death. The remaining 200 scattered in various directions, adding to the confusion. During the chaos, Ayana and I found ourselves pressed close together behind our defensive position, the ground shaking violently beneath us. "Stay near me," I told her, my hand finding hers in the darkness, gripping it tight. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "The spirits told me we would," she replied, squeezing my hand back with surprising strength. "They also told me something else, but that is for after the fighting." Amid the stampede's confusion, using the dust and noise as our cover, we circled widely toward their ammunition supply wagon. If we could destroy their powder reserves and spare ammunition, the combat would conclude before it properly began. But Mad Dog McGrath was too experienced to leave his supplies entirely unguarded, even in the midst of a stampede. He had posted alert guards on the wagon, and through the swirling dust clouds, they spotted us approaching. The man blocking our direct path was young, perhaps 25, but as he raised his Spencer rifle to fire, Ayana suddenly spoke urgently, her voice cutting through the din. "Wait, I know this man. He is Timothy Crow Dog, son of Chief Running Bear." This complication, a victim of McGrath's manipulation standing between us and victory, froze me for a split second, a heartbeat of hesitation that could cost us everything. Ayana's revelation that the man blocking our path was Timothy Crow Dog, the son of Chief Running Bear, added a layer of tragedy to the violence that sickened me to my core. "He is being used," she hissed, her eyes locking onto his vacant stare. "McGrath has been controlling his Apache allies through opium addiction, ensuring their dependence and loyalty." I looked closely at Timothy's face, seeing not the fierce determination of a warrior defending his land, but the drug-glazed confusion of a man lost in a chemical fog, a puppet dancing on strings, held by a madman. He raised his rifle, his movements sluggish but still deadly, and I was faced with the terrible arithmetic of war that permits no mercy for armed enemies, regardless of their victimization. With a heaviness in my heart that felt like lead, I eliminated Timothy with a single precise shot through the center of his chest, watching him crumple to the dust as a casualty not just of a bullet, but of a white man's greed. We didn't have time to mourn. Ayana reached the ammunition wagon first, her nimble fingers working frantically to extract pins from grenades while I provided covering fire against the rallying guards. "Run!" she screamed, and we dove for cover just as the world turned white. The resulting explosion illuminated the darkening sky like a massive 4th of July celebration, a pillar of fire that destroyed half their remaining ammunition stores and sent their terrified horses scattering across the territory. The shockwave left my ears ringing like church bells and filled my mouth with the acrid, metallic taste of cordite. But through the smoke and ringing silence, I knew the head of the snake was yet to be severed. Captain McGrath remained alive, extremely dangerous, and now furious as a wounded grizzly bear, his grand plans burning around him in the Arizona night. Through the drifting smoke and the chaos of the stampede's aftermath, I observed McGrath rallying his remaining men with the sheer force of his will. These were 5 hardened killers who had followed him through hell itself, men who had traded their souls for gold long ago and had nothing left to lose. The captain stood amid the smoking ruins of his wagon, blood streaming from numerous cuts and his uniform in tatters, but his merciless eyes burned with a destructive obsession that transcended pain. "Want to play hero, McKinnon?" His voice sliced through the combat zone noise like a cavalry saber dripping with venom. "Let's discover how heroes die in the real world." McGrath drew his match Colts, twin .45s with ivory grips yellowed by years of use, worn in the classic gunfighter style that prioritized speed over aim. But I had learned something valuable during my years fighting on the frontier. Flashy technique never defeats cold practicality. My first shot removed his hat cleanly, a warning shot that I instantly regretted as a waste of ammunition. The second bullet punched through his jacket sleeve, singing his skin. I was deliberately demonstrating that death had already marked him, but Mad Dog McGrath hadn't earned his fearsome reputation easily. He dove behind the overturned wagon with surprising agility, emerging with both weapons blazing. His bullets chewed wood splinters around my position, forcing me down, while his men established a disciplined firing line that began to whittle away our cover. It was in this desperate moment that Ayana Redcrow revealed her true nature, shedding the last vestiges of the peaceful healer to become the warrior her people needed. She began moving through the war zone with a tactical precision that stunned me, her hand signals directing our defensive fire using cavalry commands I recognized from my own military service. "I was not merely trained in healing," she called out while smoothly reloading her rifle. "My father sent me to learn white military methods at the Carlisle School. I studied warfare alongside medicine to better protect our people." What truly shocked me was not just her knowledge, but her lethal execution of it. As one of McGrath's men attempted to flank us, her throwing knife eliminated him silently before he could raise his weapon. Moments later, her war club crushed another skull in close quarters. These weren't lucky strikes born of desperation. They were the precise movements of a trained warrior who understood the anatomy of death. But superior numbers still threatened to overwhelm us. McGrath's remaining men were seasoned fighters who earned their living through violence, and they were pressing their advantage. A rifle bullet seared across my ribs, spinning me around and dropping me to one knee, the pain blinding me for a second. Through the pain haze, I saw McGrath advancing with a Spencer carbine he had retrieved, looking like death walking upright in a dusty cavalry jacket. Just as darkness seemed to close around us, salvation arrived from the hills. Miguel materialized from the gunsmoke like a ghost, his venerable Navy Colt barking steadily, dropping a raider who had drawn a bead on Ayana. Jose appeared beside him, his lever-action rifle speaking with deadly authority, while Tom Bradley limped from the chaos, his powerful Sharps rifle delivering crushing blows that punched through cover. Pat Kelly provided the decisive moment, his double-barreled shotgun erupting at point-blank range to scatter the last of McGrath's men like dry leaves in a gale. Suddenly, the battlefield fell silent, save for the groans of the dying. Only McGrath remained, wounded and cornered, but still lethal. As we faced each other across 20 yards of blood-stained ground, he made a final, desperate revelation. "You think this ends with my death, McKinnon," he rasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Senator Webb has contracts with railroad companies worth millions. Even if I fall, others will continue clearing this territory of Apache. One way or another, that land will be ours." We moved simultaneously, two experienced fighters who understood that hesitation meant death. McGrath proved faster than anticipated, his first shot tugging my shirt and his second burning my forearm, but I had survived more gunfights than birthdays. My Colt bucked twice, both shots taking McGrath center mass. He staggered backward, attempted raising his weapons once more, but the strength flowed from him like water. He dropped to his knees, then pitched forward, those merciless eyes finally closing on a world he had tried so hard to destroy. Ayana knelt beside the fallen captain, not to gloat, but to retrieve a thick leather portfolio from his saddlebags, the insurance policy of a man who trusted no one. The documents inside revealed the conspiracy's full, horrific scope. Letters stamped with territorial seals, bank drafts from prestigious Denver institutions, and railroad survey maps marking Apache sacred grounds for future development. Most damning of all was the correspondence proving Senator Webb's direct financing of the entire operation through territorial development funds, evidence of treason written in black and white. As the dust finally settled and silence returned to our battered ranch, Ayana and I found ourselves alone beside the main house, the adrenaline fading to leave us both shaking slightly. "Are you injured?" she asked, her hands gently examining my wounded ribs with a healer's touch. "I'll live," I said, wincing slightly as I caught her hands in mine to stop her inspection. "What did the spirits tell you? What you mentioned during the fighting?" She looked up at me, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight that was beginning to break through the smoke. "They told me that after the darkness passed, I would find not just an ally, but—" She hesitated, a flush rising to her cheeks. "But what?" I pressed gently. "A life partner. Someone who would help bridge our worlds permanently." I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, louder than the gunfire had been. "And do you believe what the spirits showed you?" Her smile was radiant, washing away the grime of the battle. "I am beginning to." Within 6 weeks, Ayana had personally delivered the evidence from McGrath's saddlebags to federal marshals. The fallout was swift and catastrophic for the conspirators. Senator Webb was arrested, tried for conspiracy and treason, and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison after a 4-month trial that scandalized the territory. His railroad schemes collapsed completely, and in the vacuum left by his fall, Apache lands received permanent federal protection under a comprehensive new treaty. Young Tommy Webb faced a military tribunal for his involvement, but considering his age, the coercion he faced, and his ultimate cooperation, he received 5 years of supervised community service, working with Apache tribes to establish peaceful trade relationships, a sentence that would eventually make a man out of him. 2 months after the fighting ended, Chief Black Crow himself rode to our ranch, bringing 12 tribal elders for a formal ceremony that would cement the peace we had fought for. The old chief's English was limited, but his words carried the weight of tribal authority as sacred smoke drifted around us in the golden evening light. "You could have chosen safety over honor," he stated, through Ayana's translation, his weathered face impassive. "But you stood with my daughter against darkness threatening both peoples. By tribal law and sacred custom, you are now adopted as an honorary Apache warrior." He presented me with a beautifully crafted war club, its handle carved with symbols representing courage and friendship between nations, a gift I would treasure more than any payment. Then he performed a second ceremony, one that made my heart race faster than the battle had. "My daughter has told me of her visions and of what has grown between you. If you wish to join our families as well as our peoples, you have my blessing." Colonel Morrison returned from Denver to discover his ranch battered but intact, and our cattle mostly recovered from the open range. Upon hearing the complete story, he offered me full partnership in Black Rock Ranch, recognizing that a man who had defended his property with such ferocity deserved to own a piece of it. I accepted with specific conditions, The ranch would serve as neutral ground for trade between Apache bands and white settlers, a bridge between two cultures. Over the following months, as we rebuilt the barn and established new relationships, Ayana and I found our collaboration deepening into something more personal. She taught me Apache customs while learning ranch management, and we worked together establishing trade routes and communication systems. During quiet evenings, we shared stories of our past, our hopes, and our fears. I learned about her childhood, her training as both healer and warrior, and her dreams for peace. She discovered my loneliness, my regrets about the violent life I'd led, and my longing for something meaningful beyond mere survival. On a warm evening in late autumn, nearly a year after our first meeting, we sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, the same copper hue that had heralded the start of our journey. The moment felt perfect for the question that had been growing in my heart for months. "Ayana," I said, taking both her hands in mine, feeling the calluses that matched my own. "I've spent my whole life believing I was meant to be alone. But you've shown me something different. You've shown me what it means to have a partner in every sense. Someone who stands beside you in battle, who shares your dreams, who makes you better than you ever thought you could be." Her eyes glistened as I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "Would you consider making this partnership permanent? Will you marry me and help me build something lasting between our worlds?" Her radiant smile was worth more than all the gold in the territory. "The spirits told me you would ask this question on this very evening," she whispered, leaning her forehead against mine. "And they told me what my answer would be." Our wedding ceremony 8 months later combined Apache traditions with Christian customs, blessing a union that represented more than just two people. It symbolized the hope that different worlds could find common ground. I am writing this account 18 months after that violent week, sitting on our ranch house porch with Ayana beside me, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold once more. Apache families trade regularly at our ranch now, and several white settlers have learned traditional techniques that work better in this harsh country. Our combined herds graze peacefully in the valley below, a testament to what cooperation can achieve. Children from both Apache families and the white settler families who have moved to our area play together near the creek, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, innocent of the hatreds that once stained this land. These youngsters from both communities represent the future we are building, a future where differences become strengths. My name is Caleb McKinnon. Folks call me Cal, and that week of fire and blood taught me that sometimes a man's greatest battles aren't against enemies carrying weapons, but against the hatred and greed that turn neighbors into adversaries. Some men are born for comfortable lives, while others are chosen for harder paths that lead through danger towards something better. I found my purpose in the space between two worlds, where honor outweighs profit and love proves stronger than fear. The work continues, as it always must, but tonight, watching our communities grow together while Apache drums echo peacefully from the tribal lands, the future feels bright with infinite possibility. And that, truly, is worth more than all the gold in Arizona territory.